Hello, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Part 1. Pain and Destiny. Charlotte had imagined her wedding day hundreds of times. The magnificent St. Augustine Church, a pristine white Vera Wang wedding dress with a 3-meter train, and Daniel Harrington, the young businessman hailed by the press as Wall Street's prince, holding her hand as they walked down the aisle. 200 guests, from powerful figures to trendy photographers, were there to witness the moment she became Mrs. Harrington. But life isn't like the movies. Daniel didn't show up. She stood there for 30 minutes, her high heels numbing her feet, her forced smile slowly turning into a bitter smirk. He's probably stuck in traffic, she told herself, though deep down she knew it was the dumbest lie she'd ever made up. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Charlotte, I'm sorry. I can't do this." 10 short words, no explanation, no goodbye, just enough to turn her into a laughingstock in front of the entire city. Whispers spread through the church. "Where's the groom? Was she really abandoned? Another scandal from the elite, huh?" Camera flashes went off relentlessly, as if determined to etch this humiliating moment into history. Her mother, Beatrice, grabbed her hand and whispered, "Charlotte, are you okay?" Okay? How could she be okay when the whole world was staring at her like a defective doll returned to the store? She didn't answer. She couldn't take it anymore. The pitying looks, the murmurs, the pressure from her family. She lifted her dress, her heels clattering on the marble floor, the train catching on a chair and tearing off a huge chunk. "Great, even the dress wants to abandon me," she muttered, storming out the main door. Her mother's voice calling after her was drowned out by the sound of her heels and the reporter's shouts. "Charlotte, what happened? Did Daniel really ditch you?" She ran, not knowing where to go, only that she had to escape. March rain poured down, freezing cold, soaking through every layer of fabric, plastering the drenched wedding dress to her body. Her shoes scraped her feet raw, but she didn't stop. She ran until she collapsed, exhausted, onto an empty sidewalk, rain mixing with tears on her mascara-smeared face. In front of her was a small bakery, its faded sign reading, "Richard's Bread," half worn away. A warm golden light spilled out from inside, like a beacon in the chilly rain. Charlotte gave a faint laugh. "Funny, even a run-down bakery looks happier than I do right now." She hugged her knees, huddling under the rain, too drained to stand. And then she passed out, right in front of the shop, in her tattered wedding dress. Richard was wiping down the bakery counter when he heard a thud outside. He frowned, set the rag down and muttered, "Kids messing around again or what?" He stepped outside, rain still pouring, and there she was, a girl in a wedding dress, sprawled on the sidewalk, soaked to the bone. "What's wrong with her?" Richard mumbled, rushing over. He shook her shoulder. "Hey, lady, you alive?" No response. He sighed, eyeing the shredded dress and scratched up feet. Probably got dumped or something. Life's full of surprises. Without overthinking it, he scooped her up and carried her inside, laying her on a bench near the fireplace. Charlotte woke up a few minutes later, her head spinning. She opened her eyes to find herself in a small room, the faint smell of toasted bread in the air. In front of her was a brown-haired guy with messy locks wearing an apron, looking at her with a mix of concern and curiosity. "You awake?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "I thought you were dead out there." Charlotte blinked, still disoriented. Where am I?" She glanced down at her soggy wedding dress, and it all came rushing back. Her face paled. "Oh no, don't tell me I just fainted in front of a stranger." "I'm Richard, owner of this bakery," he said, shrugging. "And you, I'm guessing, are a runaway bride?" He pointed at her dress, flashing a half-smile. Charlotte sighed, not bothering to argue. "You probably guessed it. I got dumped on my wedding day. Now I don't know where to go." Richard nodded, grabbing an old but clean blanket and handing it to her. "Wrap this around you, or you'll catch a cold. March rain's no joke." Charlotte took it, surprised by his kindness. She looked around. The bakery was small, walls stained, furniture worn. This guy didn't seem rich, but there was something warm in his eyes that pulled her out of her chaotic thoughts. "Can I sit here for a bit?" she asked, her voice tiny. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Sit, sure. But what's your next move? Going home?" Charlotte shook her head, clutching the blanket tighter. "I don't want to go back. My house will be hell if my mom finds out about this. I just want to hide somewhere." Richard crossed his arms, staring at her. "Hide? This is a bakery, not a motel. Besides, you look like a horror movie ghost right now. What if you scare off my customers?" Charlotte laughed for the first time that day, though it was a dry chuckle. "I won't stay long. Just one night, I promise." Richard sighed, clearly not thrilled about trouble, but then he shrugged. "Fine, one night, but no crying or breaking my stuff." Charlotte nodded, though inwardly she'd already decided she wasn't going anywhere. This place, it felt safer than anything she'd ever known. The next morning, Richard woke up to find Charlotte still there, not on the bench, but sprawled on the floor by the fireplace, her dried wedding dress wrinkled like a rag. He frowned. "Hey, bride, didn't you say one night? Why are you still here?" Charlotte yawned, sitting up, hair a mess. "I changed my mind. Can I stay a few more days? The press is probably stalking me like vultures out there." Richard's eyes widened. "You kidding? This is my house, not a hotel." But Charlotte just gave him puppy eyes, hugging the blanket. "Please, I've got nowhere else." Richard sighed, knowing he'd lost. "Fine, but you handle your own food. Don't touch my stuff." Charlotte nodded eagerly, but on the very first day, she proved she was a walking disaster. She rummaged through Richard's fridge, spilling a whole bottle of soy sauce on the floor. "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Richard yelled, rushing over. Charlotte grinned sheepishly. "I was hungry. Don't you have anything besides bread?" "You think I'm your personal chef or something?" Richard grumbled, but he still whipped up a simple plate of spaghetti. Charlotte watched, eyes lighting up as he set it in front of her. "Eat it. Don't waste my effort," he said. She took a bite, surprised at how good it was. "You're a great cook," she complimented, and Richard just smirked. "You haven't seen anything yet." Day 2, Charlotte turned into a full-on slob. She refused to shower, lounging on Richard's old sofa all day, scrolling through news about herself on her phone. "Look at this! They're calling me the disaster bride," she whined. Richard glanced over. "Well, they're not wrong. Look at you now. Total disaster." Charlotte glared at him, but then laughed. Day 3, she decided to help Richard in the bakery. The result? She dropped a tray of flour, turning them both into white-dusted ghosts. "You're a walking catastrophe," Richard shouted, but then burst out laughing when he saw Charlotte awkwardly apologizing. "I just wanted to help," she said, face flushed. Slowly, Richard got used to her presence. Despite his grumbling, he let her stay, even buying her an extra pillow to sleep with. Charlotte, once a proud heiress, started to like this little space, where no one judged, no one expected anything. She didn't know how long she'd stay, but for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. And Richard, though he wouldn't admit it, started to think she wasn't quite the catastrophe he'd pegged her for. Part 2. Life at the bakery. By the 5th day of Charlotte staying at Richard's bakery, she began to realize that this runaway life wasn't exactly the relaxing escape she'd imagined. Richard's tiny apartment, with its creaky sofa that groaned every time she shifted, a temperamental faucet that only worked when Coke's just right, and an ancient fridge stocked with nothing but bread and a few cans of beer, was a world apart from the 3-story, fully equipped mansion she'd once called home. But she had no other choice. Going back meant facing her mother, Beatrice, who was surely preparing a 3-hour lecture on how you've disgraced the family name. That morning, Charlotte decided to make herself a cup of coffee to kickstart the day. She rummaged through the kitchen, finding a dusty old coffee maker. "Why don't you have a decent coffee machine like normal people?" she muttered, pressing the start button. Nothing happened. She pressed harder, then started smacking the thing as if it might obey. Richard, shaping dough nearby, glanced over with an incredulous look. "What are you doing to my coffee maker? It's not a toy." "I need coffee," Charlotte snapped, turning to glare at him. "Don't you see how miserable I am? A decent cup of coffee is the only thing that can save me right now." Richard sighed, set down his tray of dough, and snatched the maker from her hands. If you don't know how to use it, don't break it. I'll do it. He filled it with water, added ground coffee, and turned it on, all in under a minute. Charlotte crossed her arms, pouting. Why didn't you just say that earlier? I'm not your personal chef who knows these things. Richard smirked. And you're not some VIP I have to cater to. That was the start of a day full of inconveniences. Charlotte wasn't used to Richard's rustic lifestyle. He lived as if comfort was a luxury he didn't care about. She wanted a hot shower? Sorry, Richard's water heater only worked when it felt like it, and today clearly wasn't her lucky day. Freezing water blasted from the shower head, making her scream and bolt out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her. Richard, is your water heater broken or what? She yelled, wet hair plastered to her face. Richard, sitting on the sofa reading a newspaper, looked up with a deadpan expression. It's not broken, it's just a little moody. Try again in half an hour. Charlotte's eyes widened. Half an hour? Are you kidding? I'm freezing here. Richard shrugged. Then put on a jacket. This isn't a five-star hotel, bride. The way he called her bride, half teasing, half cold, drove Charlotte up the wall. Don't call me that, she snapped, hurling the wet towel at him. Richard dodged it, bursting into laughter. Why get mad at me? I'm not the jerk who ditched you. The words stabbed at her still raw wound, and Charlotte fell silent, turning away. Richard realized he'd gone too far, but he didn't apologize. He wasn't the type to coddle anyone. Their cohabitation quickly turned into a series of petty arguments. Charlotte complained about the tiny bed in the room Richard had given her, about the lack of Wi-Fi for her to scroll social media, about how he kept playing old rock music instead of the trendy pop she liked. Richard, meanwhile, got annoyed at her leaving stuff scattered around, eating all the bread he'd saved, and lounging on the sofa all day like a lazy cat. How long are you planning to stay here? He asked on Friday night, noticing she still showed no signs of leaving. Charlotte, hugging a pillow while watching an old TV show on his tiny set, shrugged. Until I'm done being depressed? What, are you kicking me out? Richard sighed, plopping down on the other end of the sofa. Not exactly, but you've turned my place into a mess. Charlotte turned to him, flashing a toothy grin. Then just think of me as a roommate. I'm cute, right? Richard glared at her. Cute, my foot. You're a nightmare. But amid the bickering and cold exchanges, there were odd moments that caught them both off guard. One evening, when Charlotte spilled coffee on the floor, her third time that week, Richard didn't scold her like usual. Instead, he quietly grabbed a rag to wipe it up, then handed her a fresh cup. Watch it, it's hot, he said, his tone softer than normal. Charlotte stared at him, a little stunned. Why are you being nice all of a sudden? Richard shrugged, turning away. Because I'm tired of yelling at you. Another time when Charlotte couldn't sleep due to nightmares, images of Daniel abandoning her replaying in her mind, she slipped out to the living room, curling up on the sofa. Richard, baking late at night, glanced over and saw her. He didn't ask anything, just silently set a plate of warm bread in front of her. Eat. You won't sleep well if you're hungry, he said, then went back to his dough. Charlotte picked up a piece, took a bite, and smiled faintly. It was warm, fragrant, and somehow it made her feel lighter. Slowly, amid the inconveniences and arguments, Charlotte started noticing something different about Richard. He didn't pamper her like the people who'd once surrounded her, didn't flatter or try to cheer her up. He just lived, rough, simple himself. And though it irritated her, it also felt comforting. Richard, though he wouldn't admit it, was getting used to her presence too. She was loud, clumsy, and a total slob, but sometimes when she laughed or mumbled along to an old song on TV, he found the house a little less empty. One night, as they sat on the sofa watching a cheap comedy flick, Charlotte suddenly said, "Thanks for not kicking me out yet." Richard glanced at her, smirking. "Just don't spill anything else, and we're good." Charlotte laughed, and for the first time Richard joined in. Their laughter filled the small room, drowning out the TV's static, and in that moment, they both felt something light, something real, though neither dared say it aloud. It had been over a week since Charlotte turned Richard's little apartment into her temporary hideout. She was still a mess, sprawling on the sofa, eating Richard's bread, and griping about everything from the broken faucet to the staticky TV. But on the 8th day, things changed. That morning, Charlotte decided to venture outside for the first time since fleeing her wedding. She needed a few things: a new toothbrush, a pair of slippers to replace her ruined heels, and maybe a chocolate bar to comfort herself. She pulled on Richard's old baseball cap, put on sunglasses, and threw on a baggy hoodie he'd left on a chair. "I'll be right back," she told Richard, who was busy baking in the shop. He just nodded, not looking up. "Don't lose my hat." But she hadn't made it halfway down the block when trouble struck. A group of reporters, likely tracking rumors from social media, spotted her instantly. "Charlotte Beaumont, it's her!" one shouted, and like a swarm of bees, they surrounded her. Cameras flashed nonstop, microphones thrust in her face, questions hammering down like blows. "Why did Daniel ditch you? Are you going to sue him? Where have you been hiding all week?" Charlotte panicked. She tried to back away, but the crowd pressed in, leaving no escape. The flashing lights blurred her vision. The shouting deafened her ears. Her chest tightened, as if the air had been sucked out. "Leave me alone," she screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. And then she broke down. Not loud sobs, but silent tears spilling from sheer helplessness. She hugged her face, shrinking into herself amid the mob, the torn wedding dress, and pitying stares from the church flashing in her mind. That's when Richard appeared. He'd rushed out from the bakery after hearing the commotion, still holding a flour-dusted rolling pin. "Hey, back off!" he barked, his deep voice commanding, as he pushed through the crowd to reach Charlotte. He didn't hesitate to shove reporters aside, ignoring their protests. She said, "Leave her alone. Are you deaf?" He grabbed Charlotte's hand, pulling her out of the throng, shielding her with his tall frame. One stubborn reporter raised a camera, but Richard snatched it and tossed it to the ground with a stone-cold look. "Take another picture, and I'll smash it," he growled. The crowd backed off, unwilling to challenge his icy glare. Richard dragged Charlotte back to the bakery, slamming the door shut and locking it tight. The banging and shouting outside continued, but he ignored it. Charlotte sank to the floor by the counter, still covering her face as she cried. The tears she'd held back now poured out in sobs. "They won't leave me alone. I just want them to go away," she choked out. Richard stood watching her for a moment, then sighed. He wasn't good at comforting people. He'd never had to be. But seeing Charlotte trembling, hair a mess, he couldn't just stand there. He sat down beside her, quietly placing a cup of warm water in her hands. "Drink," he said, his tone gentler than usual. Charlotte looked up, eyes red. "What's drinking water going to change?" she grumbled, but she took the cup anyway, shakily sipping it. Richard shrugged. "Nothing, but at least you won't cry yourself hoarse." His simple words made Charlotte laugh through her tears. Though it was a weak sound, she wiped her face, looking at him. "Why did you help me? You didn't have to get involved in this mess." Richard scratched his head, turning away as if embarrassed. "Because you were bawling in front of my shop. If customers saw, they'd think I was bullying you. Who'd buy bread then?" Charlotte glared at him, but this time she didn't argue. She knew he didn't really mean it. The way he'd rushed out to protect her wasn't something an indifferent person would do. They sat in silence for a while, the reporter's noise outside fading as they gave up and left. Richard stood up, went to the kitchen, and brought back a small, freshly baked roll, setting it in front of her. "Eat. You cry a lot when you're hungry," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, like it was obvious truth. Charlotte looked at the bread, then at him. "Do you always use food to cheer people up?" Richard smirked. "Only for pains like you." She took a bite, the warm, sweet flavor spreading in her mouth. Somehow it made her feel better, not just because the bread was good, though it was, but because of how Richard talked, how he stayed with her without prying or judging. "Thanks," she said softly, her voice free of the gloom or irritation it had carried all week. Richard shrugged. "Don't thank me. I don't like sappy stuff." But that night, as Charlotte lay on the sofa, her chest didn't feel as heavy as before. She thought about that morning, how Richard had pulled her from the crowd, how he'd sat beside her without saying much. His simple phrases, "drink," "eat," "you cry a lot when you're hungry," weren't flowery comfort. but they held a strange power, like an invisible hand soothing the ache inside her. She glanced at Richard, sitting at a small table nearby, scribbling something for the bakery. The yellow light from an old round bulb shone on his face. Not flashy, handsome like Daniel, but sharp, real, and warm in its own way. For the first time, Charlotte felt her heart soften toward him. Not a clear spark, but a gentle feeling, like she'd stumbled on a support she hadn't expected. "Richard," she called softly. He looked up, raising an eyebrow. "What?" Charlotte smiled, a real smile after so many days. "Nothing, just, you're not as bad as I thought." Richard smirked, turning back to his notebook. "You're still as bad as I thought." But the corner of his mouth twitched upward, and Charlotte knew he didn't really mean it. That night she slept better than she had in ages, free of nightmares. And in her dreams, she saw a little bakery, the smell of fresh bread wafting around, and a brown-haired man with messy locks quietly baking beside her. After the chaos with the reporters, Charlotte practically refused to leave Richard's bakery. She curled up on the sofa, clutching a pillow, muttering, "I'd rather starve here than go out and get photographed again." Richard, wiping down the bakery counter, glanced at her with a look of exasperation. "Are you planning to turn into a cactus rooted to my sofa? Get up already, I'm tired of seeing you mope." Charlotte glared at him. "Go where? So you can parade me around as tabloid bait?" Richard smirked, tossing her an old jacket. "Number, come with me. Do something useful instead of lying there whining." She opened her mouth to argue, but the determination in his eyes silenced her. Reluctantly, she got up, slipped on the jacket, and shuffled after him outside. Their first stop was a community center a few blocks from the bakery. Richard explained briefly, "I volunteer here sometimes. Hand out food to the homeless. Give me a hand." Charlotte blinked, stunned. "Volunteer? Me? Are you serious? I've never done anything like this." Richard shrugged. "Well, you are now. Stop talking and take this ladle." He shoved a large ladle into her hand and nudged her toward a line of people waiting for soup. Charlotte stood awkwardly behind the serving table, her hands trembling as she scooped soup from a big pot. She spilled some on herself and yelped, "Hot!" "Why didn't anyone warn me?" Richard, standing nearby, burst out laughing. "Who told you to be so clumsy? Give it here, I'll show you." He took her hand, guiding her on how to scoop without spilling, his voice low but not harsh. Charlotte's face flushed, not from the hot soup, but from the rough touch of his hand on hers. Gradually, she got the hang of it. The homeless people smiled and thanked her. An old man even said, "A pretty girl like you standing here. It's really kind." Charlotte smiled back shyly, feeling for the first time in her life that she'd done something meaningful without needing applause. Richard watched quietly from the side, the corner of his mouth twitching upward when he saw her smile. "See? Not that hard," he said when they took a break. Charlotte nodded, an odd sense of relief washing over her. That afternoon, Richard dragged her to a local market near the neighborhood. Charlotte had never set foot in a place like it. Loud, crowded, the stench of fish mingling with vendors shouting their wares. She wrinkled her nose as a vegetable seller shoved past her. "Why is it so packed? I'm suffocating," she complained. Richard snorted. "Stop acting like a princess. This is a market, not your fancy mall." He pulled her to a vegetable stall and pointed. "Pick some potatoes, I'm making soup tonight." Charlotte picked up a potato, inspecting it like an alien object. "Is this really edible? It's so dirty." Richard laughed, a full, easy laugh that showed his white teeth and lit up his eyes. "Wash it and it's fine." "How long have you been living in the clouds?" Charlotte glared at him, but somehow his laugh stirred her. It wasn't the polished, charming smile she'd seen from Daniel, but a real grounded one, like sunlight breaking through rain. She turned away, hiding the strange feeling in her chest, and muttered, "What's so funny?" Country bumpkin. That evening, they cooked together in Richard's cramped kitchen. He assigned her to cut potatoes, but Charlotte wielded the knife like a pen, fumbling until she produced a lopsided chunk. "Look, I did it!" she boasted, holding it up. Richard glanced over and snickered. "What kind of cutting is that? It looks more like a rock than a potato." Charlotte pouted, tossing the piece at him, but he dodged it, laughing harder. Hey, don't wreck my kitchen. Despite the bickering, they finished the potato soup. Richard ladled her a bowl, sitting across from her at the tiny table. Charlotte took a sip, her eyes lighting up. This is actually good. I can't believe I helped make this. Richard shrugged. You just cut potatoes, don't get too proud. But he smiled too, and this time Charlotte didn't look away. She gazed at him, at that smile, and her heart skipped a beat. After they ate, Richard played an old record, 80s rock she'd once called ancient. But this time, she didn't complain. She sat on the sofa, listening to the scratchy guitar from the small speaker, a strange peace settling over her. This wasn't the glamorous life she'd known. No luxury cars, no champagne parties, no spotlight. Just an old bakery, a pot of potato soup, and a messy-haired man washing dishes in the kitchen. But for the first time, Charlotte felt truly alive, not just performing. She turned to Richard as he finished wiping his hands and sat beside her. Was today fun? He asked casually. Charlotte nodded, smiling. Yeah, I didn't think stuff like making soup or going to the market could be this fun. Richard smirked. The world out there isn't as bad as you think. You just haven't stepped into it. She fell silent, looking at him. Under the dim yellow light, Richard's face stood out, not strikingly handsome, but compelling, especially when he smiled. And then, almost instinctively, he smiled at her, a relaxed, unguarded smile that lit up the room. Charlotte's heart fluttered, not like a crashing wave, but like a gentle breeze. She quickly turned away, faking a cough to hide her flushed face. Why is it so hot all of a sudden? She mumbled. Richard raised an eyebrow, teasing, Too much hot soup, huh? Rest up, don't start daydreaming. Charlotte glared at him, but she knew it wasn't the soup warming her. It was his smile. That night, lying on the sofa, she closed her eyes and Richard's grin lingered in her mind. For the first time in days, she didn't dream of Daniel or the ruined wedding, but of a simple day with a simple man who was slowly becoming essential to her new life. After days of experiencing this new life with Richard, Charlotte felt like a different person. No longer the haughty heiress basking in false glamour, but an ordinary girl who liked lounging on a sofa, listening to old music, and eating potato soup. But on her 10th day at Richard's bakery, a figure from her past appeared out of nowhere, disrupting the quiet peace she'd just found. It was Julian, her college best friend, a tall, handsome guy with a Hollywood smile and an unmistakably elite sense of style. Julian had once been someone she nearly dated, but they'd settled as friends because he was too busy with his career as a music producer. He showed up at the bakery door one noon, tapping the glass and calling out, "Charlotte, I know you're in there." Charlotte sprawled on the sofa in Richard's oversized hoodie, jolted upright. "Julian, how did you know I was here?" she shouted, rushing to open the door. Richard, baking in the kitchen, heard the commotion and glanced out with a scowl but said nothing. Julian stepped in, hugging Charlotte like they'd been reunited after a century. "God, the whole city's gone crazy looking for you. I had to track rumors online to find this place. Are you okay?" Charlotte gave an awkward smile, pushing him off. "Not exactly okay, but I'm managing. Why are you here?" Julian grinned, plopping onto the sofa like he owned it. "I was worried about you. After the Daniel mess, I couldn't let you vanish like that. Plus, I've got a show nearby soon. Wanted to invite you to come watch. Cheer you up." Richard, behind the counter, watched silently. He didn't like how Julian looked at Charlotte. Confident, familiar, like he had every right to waltz in and whisk her away. When Julian clapped her shoulder and laughed loudly about old times, Richard gripped the rolling pin tighter, though his face stayed neutral. "Who's that?" he asked curtly, his voice lower than usual. Charlotte turned, oblivious. "Oh, Julian, an old friend. Julian, this is Richard, who's, letting me stay here." Julian glanced at Richard, giving a half-hearted nod. "Thanks for looking after Charlotte, but I'm here now, so I'll take her somewhere more fun than this bakery." The words hit Richard like an unintended jab. He smirked, but it wasn't a smile. "Up to her. This isn't a hotel. Leave if she wants." Charlotte frowned, sensing an unusual chill in his tone. But before she could dwell on it, Julian dragged her out, chatting animatedly. Richard stood there watching them go through the glass door. He muttered, "Good riddance, less hassle." But a nagging unease rose in his chest like someone had taken something from him, though he wouldn't admit what. All afternoon he baked, dropping trays and spilling flour, frustrating himself. "What's wrong with me?" he wondered, finding no answer. Charlotte and Julian returned late that night after dinner and a short concert. She laughed more, but something felt off. Julian said goodbye at the door, hugging her again. "Think about leaving this place, okay? It's not your scene." Charlotte nodded vaguely, but when she stepped inside, she found Richard on the sofa, his gaze icy. "Have fun?" he asked, voice flat. Charlotte shrugged. "It was fine. Julian's good at making people laugh." Richard nodded, got up, and went to the kitchen without another word. She frowned. "What's with you? Why so cold all of a sudden?" Richard turned back, smirking. "Nothing. Just tired." But his eyes said otherwise, a quiet flicker of jealousy he didn't even recognize. The next morning, Charlotte woke to find Richard gone from the bakery. Hearing children's laughter outside, she peeked out curiously. There in front of the shop, Richard was playing with a 5-year-old girl, Lily, the neighbor's kid. She tossed him a small ball, and he dramatically flopped to the ground, making her giggle. "Uncle Richard's so clumsy," Lily squealed, clutching her stomach with laughter. Richard smirked, scooped her up, spun her around, then pulled a small cookie from his pocket. "Eat this, but don't tell your mom I gave it to you," he whispered, winking. Charlotte leaned against the doorframe, her heart racing as she watched. Richard, the guy who always grumbled at her, who never said sweet words, was oddly gentle with a child. Morning sunlight lit his face, highlighting a rare smile he gave Lily. Not the teasing smirk he used on her, but a warm, genuine one, like he was sharing his whole world with the little girl. Charlotte's chest warmed, her hand unconsciously tightening on the frame. "Why am I like this?" she mumbled, trying to look away, but her eyes stayed glued to him. When Richard carried Lily home and returned, he caught Charlotte staring. "What's with the intense look?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Charlotte flinched, blushing. Nothing. I just thought you were cute with the kid." Richard shrugged. "She comes by for cookies a lot. No big deal." But he didn't know that, in that moment, Charlotte saw him differently, not just as the guy she was crashing with, but as someone she was starting to fall for. That night, they sat on the sofa as usual, but the air felt off. Charlotte talked about Julian, but her enthusiasm had faded. Richard listened, nodding occasionally, his eyes never leaving her. When she laughed, he gave a small smile too, just enough for her to notice. She stopped talking, meeting his gaze, and for once they didn't bicker or tease. It was just their eyes locking, quiet but charged with feeling. "You don't like Julian, do you?" she asked softly. Richard shrugged, looking away. "I don't care about him, as long as you're happy." But his voice wavered slightly, and Charlotte knew he wasn't as indifferent as he claimed. She smiled, her heart beating faster. "I wasn't that happy. It's more fun here with you." Richard looked up, surprised, and for the first time, he gazed at her differently, not cold, not mocking, but tender, as if he too was feeling something new. That night, neither said more, but their eyes had changed everything. March rain fell again late one night, tapping steadily on the weathered roof of Richard's old bakery. The sound of rain mingled with the wind whistling through the window cracks, making the small space feel colder than usual. Charlotte lay on the sofa, curled up in the thin blanket Richard had given her on her first day there. Tonight she couldn't sleep, not because of the creaky sofa or the broken water heater, but because of the bad dreams haunting her. She dreamt of her wedding day, the grand St. Augustine church, her pristine white dress, and Daniel standing there, only to turn and walk away, leaving her alone under the pitying stares of hundreds. The whispers, the camera clicks, her mother's reproachful voice echoed in her head like a nightmare symphony. Charlotte jolted awake, sweating despite the chill, her heart pounding. She clutched her head, breathing heavily, trying to shake the images, but tears spilled out uncontrollably. Richard, baking late in the kitchen, a habit when he couldn't sleep, heard faint sobs from the living room. He frowned, set down his tray of dough, and stepped out to check. Under the dim yellow light, he saw Charlotte huddled on the sofa, shoulders trembling, her beautiful face now streaked with tears. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with concern. Charlotte looked up, trying to wipe her tears but only smearing them more. "It's nothing, just a nightmare," she choked out, her voice shaky. Richard stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. He wasn't good at comforting people, never had been, but seeing her trembling, her red-rimmed eyes full of helplessness, he couldn't just stand by. He sighed and sat down beside her. "What kind of nightmare makes you cry like this?" She bit her lip, reluctant to share, but then blurted out, "I dreamt of the wedding. Him walking away. Everyone staring at me like I'm trash." Her voice broke, tears falling again. Richard stayed quiet, listening, his hand unconsciously clenching into a fist. He didn't know the right words, but he knew she needed more than empty platitudes. Without overthinking it, Richard reached out and pulled her into his arms. The motion was awkward, stiff, as if he'd never hugged anyone this way before. Charlotte froze, startled, but she didn't push him away. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his old shirt seep through the blanket. The faint scent of flour and baked bread from him oddly calmed her. "Stop crying," he said, his voice low but gentler than usual. "It's just a dream. You're here now. No one's abandoning you." Charlotte looked up, her eyes meeting his under the faint light. They were so close she could see every small crease on his face, every messy strand of hair falling over his forehead. Her heart raced, not from the nightmare anymore, but from his gaze. It wasn't cold or teasing, but warm, deep, as if he were peering into her soul. Richard didn't look away either, his hand still on her shoulder, his fingers trembling slightly despite his efforts to hide it. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they leaned toward each other. Richard's lips brushed hers, hesitant, soft, like neither was sure what they were doing. Charlotte's mind went blank, leaving only his warmth and the sound of rain outside. Their first kiss wasn't perfect. It was clumsy, awkward, his lips dry from flour, her nerves making her forget to breathe. But it was real, so real, like a silent confession between two people who'd once thought they could never be more than host and guest. They pulled apart after a few brief seconds, both flushing red. Charlotte turned away, clutching the blanket to hide half her face, her heart pounding. I didn't mean to," she stammered, unsure what she even meant. Richard coughed, stood up from the sofa, and turned his back as if escaping the moment. "Yeah, me neither," he said, his voice hoarse, hand scratching his messy hair. The air between them turned comically awkward. Charlotte fussed with the blanket, while Richard hurried to the kitchen, acting like the dough waiting for him was the most urgent thing in the world. "I'm going to bake. You sleep," he said without looking back. Charlotte mumbled, "Yeah, good night," though both knew sleep was out of the question after what just happened. But back in the kitchen, Richard couldn't focus. His hands shook as he kneaded dough, his mind replaying that moment, her soft lips, her breath so close it threw him off balance. He muttered, "Am I going crazy or what?" Meanwhile, Charlotte lay on the sofa, pulling the blanket to her chin, her heart still racing. She touched her lips, Richard's warmth lingering there, and she knew, no matter how much they avoided it or pretended otherwise, things had shifted between them. The next morning, they met in the kitchen as usual, but neither mentioned the night before. Charlotte tried to act normal, sipping the coffee Richard made her and saying, "Nice weather today, huh?" Richard nodded, replying curtly, "Yeah, nice." But their eyes told a different story. When she accidentally brushed his hand reaching for a plate of bread, they both flinched and quickly looked away. "Watch it, it's hot," Richard said, his voice slightly off. "Oh, thanks," Charlotte replied, her face burning. Though they tried to act casual, both recognized an undeniable truth. That kiss wasn't just a fleeting moment. It had awakened something inside them, a real, deep emotion they weren't ready to face. Richard, who'd once seen Charlotte as a temporary nightmare, now found her an essential part of his life. And Charlotte, who'd run from everything, felt her heart slowly tethering to a simple man with flour on his hands. That night, as the rain stopped, Charlotte lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling with a smile. Richard, in the kitchen, paused kneading dough to glance out the window, a faint smirk on his lips. They said nothing, but both knew. From now on, the way they looked at each other would never be the same. Are you still following the story? Please comment where you're following it from. Maybe we're from the same place. Part 3. Secrets, Separation, and True Love. After the clumsy kiss in the rainy night, Charlotte and Richard slipped into an odd state. Nothing officially acknowledged, but the way they looked at each other had changed. They still bickered as usual, still teased each other about spilled coffee or dropped bread, but a quiet closeness wove itself into every moment. Charlotte began to think that this life at the bakery, simple, lacking in luxuries, might be where she wanted to stay forever. But on the 12th day, an unexpected secret turned everything upside down. That morning, Richard told Charlotte he had to step out to handle some business. "What's so important? Buying more flour?" she teased, sprawled on the sofa with a coffee mug in hand. Richard shrugged, replying curtly, "Yeah, something like that. Stay here, don't wreck my place." He threw on his old jacket, pulled on a baseball cap, and left with a calm expression. But Charlotte, feeling curious about him for the first time, decided to do something she'd never done before. Follow him. She grabbed a hoodie, put on the cap he'd left behind, and trailed him from a distance. He didn't head to the grocery store as she'd assumed, but turned into a fancier street lined with tall buildings and expensive cars. Charlotte frowned. What's he doing here? She watched as Richard entered a modern glass building, the glowing E-Mart logo, the city's largest supermarket chain, shining at the top. Maybe he's just shopping, she told herself, but she decided to follow inside anyway. Sneaking into the lobby, pretending to be a customer, she saw Richard head straight for a private elevator reserved for senior staff. A man in a suit, looking like a secretary, bowed respectfully as he greeted him. Charlotte froze, ducking behind a potted plant to watch. The elevator took Richard to the top floor, where a sign read, "Board of Directors Meeting Room." She stood there, her mind reeling. Board of Directors? Richard? He's a baker. Unable to believe her eyes, Charlotte waited for him to come down. An hour later, Richard emerged, still in his worn jacket, but now accompanied by a group of sharply dressed people in suits. One of them spoke loudly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Maxwell. We'll prepare the next quarter's report as you requested." Richard nodded, his voice low. "Good. Keep it quiet as always." Charlotte's ears rang as if struck by lightning. "Mr. Maxwell, sir? Richard is..." "What?" She rushed back to the bakery before he returned, her thoughts in chaos. When he walked in, still wearing that nonchalant look as if nothing had happened, Charlotte couldn't hold back. "Where'd you go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard shrugged. "Shopping. Told you already." But Charlotte stood up, facing him, her eyes blazing. "Stop lying. I saw you at E-Mart, meeting with the board of directors. Who are you? Why'd you hide it from me?" Richard froze, his hand pausing midair. He sighed, took off his cap, and looked at her with a complicated expression. "You followed me?" Charlotte snapped. "Yes! And I found out you're not some baker. What are you, a supermarket tycoon?" Richard stayed silent for a moment, then said slowly, "I'm Richard Maxwell, the founder of E-Mart, but I didn't want anyone to know." Charlotte's eyes widened, feeling like the floor had dropped out beneath her. "Founder? You're a millionaire? And you let me live in this rundown bakery with a creaky sofa and a broken faucet? Are you messing with me?" She stepped forward, jabbing a finger at his chest, her voice thick with anger. "Why'd you hide it? Did you think I was your little game?" Richard met her gaze, his eyes no longer teasing or cold, but filled with pain. "I'm not messing with you. I hid it. From you, from everyone, because I'm tired of that life. Money, power, people flocking to me just because I'm Richard Maxwell. I opened this bakery to live authentically, to find myself again. I wanted someone to stay with me for me, not for the millionaire title." Charlotte stepped back, her chest heavy. His words were so raw they hurt, but her anger didn't fade. "What about me? You let me stay here. Let me think you were some broke guy, When you could be living in a mansion, driving a supercar? You didn't trust me? You thought I'd only care about your money? Richard lowered his head, his fists clenching. It's not that I didn't trust you. I just didn't want to lose you. When you came here, you didn't know who I was, and you stayed anyway. You argued with me, spilled coffee, cut lopsided potatoes, but you were real. I was scared that if you knew the truth, everything would change. I wanted you to love the real me, not the millionaire shell. Charlotte fell silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. His words cut like a knife, painful yet warm. She turned away, her voice choked. You don't get it. I stayed here not because you were poor or rich. I stayed because you were Richard, the grump who made me coffee, baked for me, pulled me out of that reporter mob. But you hid this from me. You didn't give me a chance to know the real you. Richard stepped forward, reaching for her shoulder, but she backed away. Charlotte, he said, his voice hoarse, I didn't want to lose you. I've never wanted anyone to stay as much as I want you. But Charlotte shook her head, hugging herself. I need time. I don't know what to think anymore. She turned, walked into the bedroom, and shut the door, leaving Richard standing there, his eyes full of regret and pain. That night, neither slept. Charlotte lay in bed, her mind a storm of anger and hurt. She thought of their days together, the arguments, the smiles, their first kiss, and wondered if it was all a lie. Richard sat in the kitchen, holding a piece of bread he'd made for her, but hadn't given, his heart heavy. He knew he'd been wrong to hide it, but he didn't know how to fix it. The secret was out, and though both were in pain, they also realized a truth. What they felt for each other wasn't a game, but could Charlotte forgive him, and could Richard fully open his heart? The answer hung unanswered in the air of that little bakery. After the tense confrontation about Richard's secret, the atmosphere in the bakery grew stifling. Charlotte shut herself in the bedroom all night, saying nothing more, while Richard sat in the kitchen, staring at the cold bread he'd meant to give her. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window, Charlotte emerged with a weary face, eyes red from crying. She dragged her small suitcase, the one she'd brought when she fled her wedding, and stood before Richard, who was quietly brewing coffee. I'm leaving, she said, her voice hoarse but resolute. Richard looked up, his hand freezing midair, his eyes darkening. Where to? He asked, though he already guessed the answer. Charlotte bit her lip, avoiding his gaze. Home. I need time to think. I'm not sure about all of this anymore. Richard set the coffee cup down, his voice low but trembling slightly. Not sure about what? Me? Or who I am? Charlotte shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't know. I don't know if I really understand you or if I've just been fooling myself. You hid too much from me, Richard. I need to go find myself again. He looked at her, his eyes filled with anguish, but he didn't stop her. He wanted to shout, to tell her he didn't care what she thought of his past as long as she stayed. But he stayed silent, clenching his fists. If you want to go, I won't stop you, he said, his tone icy, though his heart was shattering. Charlotte nodded, pulled her suitcase to the door, but before stepping out, she turned back for one last look. Thank you for everything. Richard gave a faint smirk, saying nothing, just watching her leave through the glass door, her figure fading into the morning light. Charlotte returned to her family's mansion, the place she'd once fled. Her mother, Beatrice, greeted her with a long lecture about honor and duty, but this time Charlotte didn't argue. She nodded absently, stepping into her lavish room with its king-sized bed, designer-filled wardrobe, and a $1,000 coffee machine. But it all felt hollow. She sat on the bed, gazing out the window, realizing that money and comfort couldn't fill the void in her heart, a void Richard had once filled with warm bread, petty arguments, and that clumsy kiss in the rain. Richard, back at the bakery, wasn't the same either. He still baked, still brewed coffee, but the house now felt eerily silent. The sofa sat empty, the kitchen free of coffee spills, and no morning quarrels echoed through the air. He tried to act tough, muttering, "Good riddance. Less hassle." But every glance at the old sofa brought back Charlotte's eyes, her smile, and a sharp pain stabbed his chest. He hadn't held her back, but the tormented look in his eyes as she left said it all. He'd lost the most important thing in his life. Charlotte slipped back into high society, attending parties, meeting old friends like Julian, laughing as if nothing was wrong. But every time she held a champagne flute, she thought of Richard's coffee. Every compliment on her beauty reminded her of him calling her a disaster. She realized money couldn't buy the peace she'd felt with him, couldn't buy his genuine smile, couldn't buy the warmth of his arms that rainy night. Richard in the bakery couldn't go back to how things were either. He worked like a machine, but each night he sat on the sofa, staring at the blanket Charlotte had used, wondering if he'd been wrong not to stop her. Both returned to their old lives, but neither was the same. Their hearts were broken, and only the other could fill the emptiness. A month passed since Charlotte left. She lived in the mansion, but the sense of displacement grew stronger. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she opened her laptop and started writing. A personal blog, something she'd never done before. She titled it, "True Love Isn't Found in Glamour," and let her emotions pour onto the page. She wrote about being abandoned at her wedding, about fleeing and finding a small bakery. She described Richard, not the millionaire Richard Maxwell, but the baker Richard with messy hair, who made her coffee, pulled her from reporters, and held her in the rain. "I used to think love was lavish parties and sweet promises, but I was wrong. Love is arguing over spilled coffee, a warm plate of bread on a cold night, a quiet look warmer than 1,000 words. I left him because I was scared, but now I know. I never stopped loving him." The post spread quickly online. Richard, not one for browsing the web, stumbled across it when a regular customer mentioned it at the bakery. He sat down reading each line, his heart pounding as he saw his name. "She still loves me?" he mumbled, hands trembling. He looked around the bakery, once filled with Charlotte's laughter, and realized he'd never stopped loving her either. But he didn't know how to reach out, didn't know if she'd forgive him. Meanwhile, Charlotte decided to do one last thing to face her feelings. She signed up for a charity food distribution at the community center, the place she and Richard had once gone together. She stood behind the table, ladling soup for the homeless, glancing around hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But he didn't show. She forced a smile for the people, though her heart sank. He probably doesn't want to see me anymore, she thought. Richard at the bakery heard about the event from little Lily, the neighbor girl. "Uncle Richard, that pretty lady from before, is handing out soup at the center. Aren't you going?" Lily asked, eyes sparkling. Richard hesitated, then stood, grabbed his jacket and ran there. From a distance, he saw Charlotte scooping soup with her familiar clumsiness, and his heart clenched. She was still there, still the Charlotte he loved. Not the heiress, but the honest, real girl. Charlotte looked up, and their eyes met across the crowd. She froze, the ladle slipping from her hand, splashing soup on her shirt. Richard walked over, smirking. "Still as clumsy as ever, huh?" Charlotte blushed, then laughed, a real laugh. "And you still tease me like always." They stood there gazing at each other, and though forgiveness wasn't spoken, their eyes said it all. They'd learned to let go of the past and were ready for a new beginning. After their eyes met at the charity event, after Charlotte dropped the ladle and Richard teased her, still as clumsy as ever, they stood there amid the crowd, saying nothing more. But Charlotte's smile and Richard's tender gaze spoke volumes. They knew they couldn't lose each other again. That day, they didn't rush to confess. They quietly cleaned up together after the event, trading familiar jabs as if they'd never been apart. 2 days later, Richard decided to do something he'd been mulling over for the month since Charlotte left. He didn't warn her, just sent a brief text. "Come to the bakery tonight. I've got something for you." Charlotte frowned, replying, "What? Burnt bread again?" Richard smirked at the message but didn't respond. When Charlotte stepped into the bakery that evening, she was surprised by the change. Instead of the usual flower scent, the place was simply but warmly decorated. A few small candles on the counter, a tiny table with 2 chairs in the center, and a plate of hot bread, her favorite kind. Richard stood there, not in his usual apron, but in a crisp white shirt, slightly wrinkled, and old jeans. "What's this? Throwing a party?" she teased, though her heart raced at the seriousness in his eyes. Before Richard could speak, Charlotte's mind drifted to Daniel, the man who'd once promised her the world. Their 2-year relationship had begun at lavish parties, with his honeyed words whispered over champagne. Daniel, Wall Street's prince, was her mother's favorite, the man she'd thought would give her a perfect life. But it was all an illusion. He'd abandoned her on their wedding day without explanation, leaving her with pain and self-doubt. Now, seeing Richard before her, simple and real, Charlotte realized what Daniel never gave her, the feeling of being loved for who she truly was, not for fame or wealth. Richard cleared his throat, stepping closer and snapping her out of her thoughts. "Sit down. I'm not good at this stuff, so don't laugh." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, sitting with her chin in her hand, watching him. "What's so serious? Don't tell me you're kicking me out again." Richard didn't answer, just took a deep breath and, to her shock, dropped to one knee. Charlotte's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth, nearly knocking over the water glass. "Richard, what are you doing?" He looked into her eyes, his voice low and shaky. "Charlotte, I don't know how to say sappy stuff. I don't have a diamond ring or a long speech like those rich guys you've met. But I know I don't want to live another day without you here, arguing with me, spilling coffee, or sprawling on the sofa. I want to be your husband for real, not because of the bakery, not because of E-Mart, but because you're everything I need. Will you marry me?" Charlotte froze, tears spilling uncontrollably. She sobbed, nodding frantically through her laughter. You idiot! Who proposes in a bakery like this? But yes, I'll marry you." Richard grinned, a rare, joyful smile, standing to pull her into his arms. He hugged her so tight she lightly pounded his chest. "Let go, I can't breathe." But she hugged him back, tears soaking his shirt. "I thought you'd say no because I don't have a ring," he teased, voice rough. Charlotte glared at him through her tears. "What do I need a ring for? I just need you." They stood there embracing in the little bakery, candlelight flickering over their entwined shadows. A week later, they held their wedding, not in a grand church or luxury hotel, but right in the bakery where it all began. Charlotte wore a simple white dress from a local shop, while Richard sported his white shirt and jeans, his fanciest outfit. The guest list was small: little Lily as the flower girl, a few friends from the charity center, and an old man Charlotte had once served soup to. There was no grand orchestra, just the old speaker playing 80s rock Richard loved. They cut a cake, a big loaf of bread he'd baked, and laughed when Charlotte dropped a piece on her dress. "Still clumsy as ever," Richard teased, and she shot back, "And you still love me despite it." The wedding wasn't lavish, but it was warm and full of love, just like how they'd found each other. As night fell, they sat on the old sofa, hand in hand, watching the golden light from the bakery glow on the walls. Charlotte rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "I don't need anything more than this." Richard smiled, kissing her forehead. "Good, 'cause I don't have anything more to give." They laughed, and in that moment, they knew this was the start of their forever. A year later, Charlotte and Richard moved to a small seaside house. Not a lavish mansion or penthouse, but a modest wooden home with a porch facing the waves. Richard had sold most of his E-Mart shares, keeping the little bakery as a memento, and used the money to build this place. "I don't need riches anymore," he told Charlotte as they moved in. "Just you and that old sofa are enough." Charlotte laughed. "Not the old sofa, but I'll agree to the rest." Their life stayed as simple as ever. Richard opened a small bakery by the sea, baking bread and brewing coffee each morning. Charlotte, now adept at cutting potatoes, though still a bit lopsided, often helped despite occasionally spilling flour or burning loaves. They bickered and teased, but every spat ended with a smile or a hug. One afternoon, while Charlotte stood behind the bakery counter, she felt unusually tired. She sat down, hand on her stomach, and Richard rushed over, worried. "What's wrong? Too much bread again?" he teased, though his eyes were full of concern. Charlotte shook her head, smiling faintly. "Number, I think? I'm pregnant." Richard froze, then laughed, the happiest laugh she'd ever heard. "Really? I'm gonna be a dad?" He scooped her up, spinning her around the shop, making customers chuckle. From then on, Richard grew gentler. though he kept his familiar roughness. He baked low-sugar bread since Charlotte craved sour flavors, fixed up an old armchair for her comfort, and brewed ginger tea every night. Charlotte, her belly growing, still loved lounging on the sofa, the new one they'd bought, though she called it ancient to tease him. A year after their wedding, they welcomed a girl, named Lily after the neighbor girl who'd brought them together. Little Lily had Richard's bright eyes and Charlotte's radiant smile. Their life wasn't wealthy or glamorous, but it overflowed with love. Each morning, Richard carried Lily to the beach to play, while Charlotte watched from the porch, her heart full of peace as father and daughter laughed with the waves. The story closed on a sunset, the sky blazing red as it sank into the sea. Richard and Charlotte sat on the porch, Lily asleep in his arms. Charlotte leaned on her husband's shoulder, whispering, "You know, I used to think happiness was money and fame, but now I know. It's this, just you and Lily." Richard smiled, kissing her hair. "Good, 'cause all I've got to give is this bakery and that sofa." Their laughter mingled with the sound of the waves. Under the sunset, their simple life together, needing nothing but each other, was the perfect end to a love story that began in a little bakery with a runaway bride. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.